Hey there, my 5 faithful listeners and anyone who randomly stumbled upon this episode. My name is Lydia, and this is the Lydia Todd Pod. It's probably not a good idea to start a podcast because your last name rhymes with pod. But I'm here anyways. From spontaneous trips to special guests to deep spiritual conversations and everything in between, expect inspiration, stories, and plenty of laughter. Grab a glass of milk, settle in, and let's dive into the episode. Season 1. Hey guys, welcome back, and I am so excited to share the next couple of episodes with you. We've had quite a journey, with the last few being really deep discussions with my great friends, Mr. Daniel and Kaylee, and now I am ready to dive into some other topics. While this first one is kind of related, as in it's a faith topic, this is completely different than the last 3 episodes. Next week, we're going to have another travel episode, and I'll give you all the details on how to move to another country, and that will be really fun. But today, we are going to talk about truth. It is a big topic, and had I known how big it was whenever I decided to do this episode, maybe I would have narrowed it down some more. But alas, here we are with 15 pages of notes, and a lot more research went into this than just that, but I've tried to highlight, summarize. There is no way that I could cover everything on this topic in one episode, and so this is just kind of a launch pad for anyone who's wondering about this topic. Maybe you've studied it and you want a good refresher. This episode would be good for that. Maybe you want to study parts of it, but you don't know which areas your questions are actually in. So I feel like after this episode, if you have any questions, they will definitely surface and you'll be able to explore them. I would love for you to share with me whenever you do more research on this topic. Send me whatever articles you're reading or papers, scholarly sources you're using. Would love to look more into this. Here's what I have, and this is what we're going to go through. You can't handle the truth. That is a popular quote and will probably be my title for this episode. And I found out that it is from A Few Good Men. I don't even know if I've ever seen that movie, but it's in there. So the more you know. So my first question when deciding to talk about truth is obviously, what is truth? Like, how do we decide what truth is? Before saying that, anytime I use a big term, I'm gonna try to define it. Sometimes I might use big words and forget to define them. If I ever do that, please pause the episode, go to Google, find the definition. There's no sense in reading things or listening to things and not understanding the terms when you're trying to understand a concept. That's also a tip for any readers out there. Whenever you are reading, whether it be a book for school or just for fun, if you come across a word you don't know, look it up. There's no harm in taking 30 seconds out of your reading to figure out what the author is trying to say. That will allow you to take more out of the book and you'll have a new vocab word. So, yay, we love random tips about reading. How do we decide? So, the term epistemology is the study of the nature and scope of knowledge. And so if you're doing research on truth, you're going to come across a lot of epistemology, jargon, and literature. This is what they study when they want to distinguish what is a justified belief versus just an opinion. The study of knowledge, of philosophy, all of that is relevant to truth because in the end, knowing a truth is accumulating more knowledge. And so that is kind of a foundational part of learning truth. How I've seen truth defined online, I've got a couple different definitions. Truth is the real facts about a situation, event, or person. It is the actuality. It is that which is true or in accordance with fact or reality. We all recognize truths every single day of our lives. We are forced to be confronted by truths daily. Is truth always easy to hear, or is it painful sometimes? Does truth care about feelings? I ask this because truth is reality, and sometimes reality is gruesome. It's hard to hear. Well, long story short, no. Truth does not care about your feelings. And sometimes we don't mind because our feelings are in line with truth, but other times there are heavy truths. There are truths that are hard to bear. That doesn't make them less true. Now, talking about truth, I've heard many different types of truths used when discussing political things, religious things, even scientific things. And so I wanted to find a definition for each of these truths, and looking into these different types was a majority of my research because most people don't use the same definitions when using these terms. That was very disheartening, and it made it very difficult to come to conclusions on certain ideas about truth because in every article you read, you have to figure out what the author means when they say truth, when they say absolute, when they say objective, when they say subjective. What do they mean by these terms? So let's start first with the term absolute truth. This is something that is true in all places at all times. It is something that is fixed, unchangeable. This is a term that often comes with baggage. One or two of the scholars that I read said that they choose to not use this term just because of the connotations it normally carries when it comes to religion, especially. And I understand that some terms can have baggage, but I'm still going to use this one because it does vary from the other types of truth. So it would be sort of biased of me to say, just because I've heard that term used in very wicked ways, then I'm not going to use that term or consider that term to exist at all. An example of an absolute truth would be there are no round squares. This is something that it would be contradictory to have a square that is not in the shape of a square. Absolute truth is kind of the foundational things, the reality that no one can escape, that doesn't change over time. It is something that is true for all people at all times, in all places, everywhere. While there may be many absolute truths, not every truth is an absolute, and so it's important to recognize that when we talk about truth, that we don't generalize all truths. I could say something like, this cup is full, but that does not mean that that will be true in a couple hours. For an absolute truth, there's no possible way to argue against it. There were tons of, I guess, people who have heard these terms and were upset by them have claimed there is no absolute truth. But to argue against absolute truth, you have to use an absolute truth, such as there is no such thing as truth. The truth is relative, there's no truth. All of those statements are absolutes. Anytime you try to argue against absolute truth, you prove that it exists. Philosophers and the researchers that I've read through said there's no sense in saying absolute truth does not exist because that's a self-contradicting statement. And so, if it didn't exist, then we couldn't be having this conversation right now. We couldn't be discovering and proving truths or not truths. An absolute truth would be a truth that's not dependent in relation to another thing. We'll talk about objective truth in a minute, but the truth that is objective is one that is not in any way dependent or in relation to the observing subject. Most people seem to believe that the movement of objects in the cosmos doesn't depend on whether they're being observed or whether they're being understood in a particular way. And so that would be an absolute truth. It's something that happens that does not depend on us proving it or doesn't change. It just is. It is also important to recognize that absolute truth is not necessarily equivalent to absolute certainty. While we may never fully grasp the complexities of the universe, of nature, or even of existence, we can still strive to uncover as much of that truth as is possible. And this is going to be done through open-mindedness, careful observation, and lots of critical thinking. The quest for absolute truth is a deeply personal quest, and it's up to each of us to determine what we understand to be true based on what we have perceived, our observations, our experiences, and our understanding of the world and how it is around us. The second type of truth is relative, and that is the opposite of absolute truth. Relative truth is existing or possessing a specified characteristic only in comparison to something else, so it is not absolute. This is not the same as subjective truth, although these truths sometimes overlap or fall into the same categories. So, an example of relative versus absolute truth that many of us will agree on is that murder is absolutely bad, while killing is relative. Killing can be good in the case of self-defense, but killing can be bad in the case of premeditated murder. Across the board, murder is seen as an absolute bad, along with things like rape and abuse of children, but then there are other things that we morally see as a relative good or bad situation. Not that those situations change, like whenever we hear about murder, we don't think one day it's good, the next day it's bad. But we relatively understand that under the scope of killing for self-defense, many would say is not bad. So that truth is only true in comparison to other truths. One truth is that I exist. I am. I am here. The possible fact that no one else in the world knew that answer or could see that proven doesn't negate the actual fact that it does, that I am. And this much in this moment is absolutely true. Now on to the more fun terms. We have subjective and objective truth. Subjective truth is based on or influenced by personal feelings, taste, or opinions. Subjective truth is something held to be true based on your personal individual perspective. This is where things get interesting. Subjective truths are things that maybe in popular media are referred to as her truth, my truth. These are things that are true to me because of my perception, because of my opinion. I can say that this is the best chocolate milk in the world, and that may be true to me, but that may not be true to anyone else in the world. You can absolutely speak in absolutes about your subjective truth, and many people do. Like whenever I said, this is the best chocolate milk in the world, we all understand that as a subjective truth, but I said it as an absolute. Instead of going out of my way to say, I perceive this to be the best chocolate milk in the world to me personally at this moment. I'm not going to word every sentence that is a subjective truth in a subjective way. And so whenever we analyze what our friends say or what people around us say, we need to assume the best of the other person. Don't assume that they are trying to trick you or manipulate you just because they have spoken an absolute that may not be true. Sometimes they're just speaking like that because that's how our language works. I try to give people the benefit of the doubt when they say something that isn't true because they could be speaking from their personal experience and just saying it as an absolute. So to recap on relative and subjective, when a truth is relative, that means in a certain culture, in a certain language, in a certain society, in a certain time, there may be a truth that is true in that moment relative to other truths. It's not absolutely always the case. While subjective truth is something that is true because I perceive it from my personal mind. It is a mind-dependent truth. I can perceive an absolute truth subjectively. I can see that something is true and know that truth, but my mind knows it. And this is where we get into some fun things with objective truth. Some people define objective truth as the cumulative of all subjective truths, and I disagree on this one. Objective truth is something that is true independent from someone's subjective perspective, including the influence of their personal bias. This means it exists and it can be proven in this reality. It is truth whether you agree with it or not. An objective truth is a truth that is the same for everyone in the sense of being under Aristotle's 3 laws of thought. One specific one is the law of non-contradiction. So no statement is both true and false in the same sense at the same time. Meaning an objective truth is true for everyone, but it is only true in the sense that it is true for everyone at that moment, at that time. This is different from objective truth that is true across the board at all times, for ever and ever and ever. Amen. So, for example, the statement, I have $2 in my pocket, or it is raining in London right now, both of those are what we would consider objective truths. They are either objectively true or they are objectively false, and it does not matter on my perception of it or my experience with it, and it's something that can be proven. Objective truths are true regardless of opinions or worldviews of anyone. I have totally been using this term wrong in the past. I've been interchangeably using absolute truth and objective truth. But objective is a personal type of truth, and absolute is a relational type of truth. So a truth can be objectively true at a certain point in time, but 50 years later, that truth can change. Absolute truth will be the same across time, across circumstance, and everything else. An example, an objective truth currently is that the highest jump ever is 2.44 meters into the air, which is just under 8 feet. This cannot be an absolute truth because each time the record is broken, there becomes a new objective truth. Objective truths are usually things that can be proven with either logic, math, science, data, evidence, experience. I'm not claiming that every objective truth can be proven because I haven't done enough research to draw that conclusion, but objective truths usually at least can collect evidence to confirm or deny its truthfulness. There may be a truth that is more true than your objective perspective can comprehend at this moment. And what I mean by this is that there are future possibilities to break records that we just don't think are breakable right now. There are things that we can't measure with our 5 senses. There are things that we will never be able to know, but are still absolutely true. This is one truism that we need to accept and not let it deter us from knowing what we can. It is sad that there's no way for us to be certain and know every single truth that exists. There are some that are outside of our capacity of understanding, our capacity to verify. But this doesn't mean that we should give up on all the truths that we can know. One objective truth is the nature of a certain thing. It's implicit regardless of our capacity to understand it. We may not understand it or be able to explain it well because of limitations in our language and thought, but the truth simply is. If I say objective truth is real, the verb is makes an assertion about the objective order of things. So the existence of objective truth cannot be evaluated without objectiveness. Objective truth has to exist, and not only that, but it's a prerequisite for objective assertions to be made at all. Our perceptions of things may be subjective, but the reality itself is not. Subjective truths recognize the perceived. So if what you perceive matches your reality, then you have both a subjective and an objective truth. This means that you can know something subjectively and objectively. Some truths are purely subjective, like your favorite movie, your favorite meal, how good the last Marvel movie was. Those things are purely subjective. But there are some truths that we know that are objective and subjective. The baseline for this is reality. Reality is completely binary. We know that things either are or they are not. And even though our perceptions, they vary and change, it doesn't change empirical reality at all. Something being empirical means that it's based on or verifiable by observation or experience rather than theory or pure logic. So science uses empirical evidence to find out truths in science. Since empirical truths are based on evidence and science uses empirical reasoning and discovery to make its truths, this means that science has very few absolute truths, although it supplies us with a ton of objective truths. Science is way more about empirical evidence, which leads to objective truths. Absolute truths are something sometimes we can know from empirical evidence, but other times we can't. So we'll kind of get into it later, but science can't be used to prove certain claims that are philosophical or logical or religious or even mathematical ideas sometimes because those are not in the realm of empirical evidence. The realm of knowledge has been divided into two categories. One is empirical or sensory knowledge, and then the second is purely deductive or rational knowledge. Science uses the first category of knowledge to supply its evidence for its truths. Even though science doesn't prove a lot of the truths that we have outside of the scientific world, there's still ways that science can provide evidence for or against certain ideas in the other areas. And the evidence that we see in science, so the truths that we find from science, are obviously going to be cohesive with the rest of reality. And so they can confirm if we are on the right track or the wrong track with other truths. All of reality is not going to contradict itself. There won't be any contradictions within reality, within all of the truths that are true, because they're either true or they're not. How are we so certain about objective truths? Well, we all share a singular objective reality. Objective meaning the existence of reality itself and everything that happens independent of our awareness of those things. In this objective reality, nothing happens at random, but it's all traceable to its cause in the past. And so another term for this is it being deterministic. As humans, using our brains, we can identify patterns and we can see causes and effects. We can imagine the processes that drive these patterns to happen. By doing that, we start to understand how the world works and we start grasping objective truths. Aside from this capacity to understand what's happening around us, we also have the ability to make statistical or intuitive inferences about our circumstances or the world around us. And so this helps us when the empirical is lacking or when our understanding isn't complete. We can use inferences to assume because of this happening like it always has in the past, we can assume that this will happen in the future. And even though our understanding of objective truth is individual, so there's a subjective element of it, it's still able to be called objective because we are all working towards the same goal of finding the same one reality. And that one reality is objective, it's not dependent upon us. And so, since we all are working towards finding this one objective reality, then we should, and often do, come to the same conclusions about truths in this reality. This is why two people on completely opposite sides of the earth can come to the same conclusion about a truth, like they can discover a new truth without even learning it from each other. In the science realm, this is called multiple discoveries, and I think it's pretty cool when that happens because that just kind of confirms that there are truths that are objective that we can find, because if they were all subjective, then we wouldn't find the same truths. We would all have our own version. The general population or I guess the unstudied on this topic, sometimes defines objective truth as every subjective perspective added to one bigger objective perspective relative to a specific subject matter. So then the source of truth would, in this definition, be from our own minds. I have to refuse this cliche definition because this would make all knowable things just something created and made up by our minds. But I know that there are certain objective truths that are due to reality and not due to me thinking them into existence, such as I am or I breathe. So we're going to scratch that idea about objective truth just being the cumulative of all subjective truths. And we're going to go back to philosophy's and scholars' definition, which is the one that I had given at the beginning. Objective truth is more physically observable, it's in the details. Absolute truth is more inevitable, more big picture. And in terms of what we can know, all of reality is objective. All truth is objective about reality, but how we view the truth can be subjective, and it can be influenced by opinions and perceptions and feelings. That is kind of a crash course on absolute, relative, subjective, and objective truth. And when I say crash course, I mean like 5-minute cram before your exam crash course. So I'm just hitting the surface on a lot of these topics, but hopefully that cleared up things and didn't confuse you more on the differences between absolute and objective truth and then relative and subjective truth. And there's a lot of overlap, but it's important to use these terms as what they actually mean. The next question I had to dig into for this topic was, is truth important and should we care? So now that we know what the different truths are, does it even matter? Should we even care about what truth is? Truth is what allows us to prevent injustices, because we can never correct a wrong or right an injustice if we don't have the power of truth to claim something is wrong. Descartes, Benson, and Stangroom, man, I'm probably messing up all these names. You guys just know I'm just a girl with a mic. Anyways, those three said, their research said that we have a moral duty to discover and reveal truth. And they're right. If we want justice, if we want things to go well, then we have to know the truths so that we can direct our actions and in our lives towards the things that are just. Another reason you should care about truth is because science is dependent on truthfulness. So if you enjoy science, are you like, the discovery of things, if you're big into planets, solar system, nature, anything like that, the only way you have science is if you have truths that you can use to empirically find out the foundations of science. A third reason that you should care is because truth matters for every decision you make. It matters for personal relationships, it matters for science, it matters for public policy. You can't really make a decision that is, I guess, a good decision if you don't know any truths to base your decision off of. Everything would just be guesswork. A fourth reason, and I think that this is one of the strongest reasons, is that we all agree fake news is harmful. We are always up in arms about how we hate fake news and how we need to fact check everything. And if we think that fake news is so bad, then we have to be able to prove that it's wrong. So, another reason truth matters. We also think that being rational and thoughtful is valuable. We value people who are rational, people who are thoughtful. And being rational or thoughtful is just trying to base judgments on truth. We also value wisdom. And when truth is buried under a bunch of misrepresentations, then you can't make a wise decision. Wisdom demands a foundational knowledge of truth. There's this guy named Michael Lynch, and I found him during my research. He's a philosopher, and he has written a lot about truth. One thing that he said was, the growing cynicism around truth stems from our confusion over what truth is. But without truth, we're incapable of acting with integrity or living authentically. And so he creates 4 truisms about truth, which I think that's funny because it's just truths about truth. So Lynch's 4 truisms about truth are: 1, that truth is objective; 2, truth is good to believe; 2, it is good to believe what is true; 3, truth is a goal worthy of inquiry; and 4, truth can be worth caring about for its own sake, not just because it gets us the things that we want. Truth and the pursuit of truth is part of living a happy life. Arguably, one of the greatest speakers on the topic of truth once said, "You shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free." There is a freedom that is only achieved by truth. And I guess a way that you can see this is there's this benefit that when you learn truth, you're able to let go of your personal biases and your personal attachments that have been holding you back. If you are attached to a lie, then you're not able to live out your full potential in reality. When you're attached to some belief or some perspective that's not true, you limit your thinking and your ability to see things clearly. The truth will set you free. Truth can also just lead to joy and fulfillment and inner peace. When you have this deeper understanding of the world around you, then you're way less likely to be swayed by external circumstances. Regardless of what's happening around you, you can know it's going to be okay because you have a truth that's foundational, that's able to support you in those times. So, yes, truth is important and you should care. We have to stop being scared of our beliefs being challenged to the extent that we no longer want truth at all costs. Truth is important. Truth is what matters. The next question I wrote was, is sincerity enough? The long story short is no. Let me give you a couple examples of some sincerely wrong people. Imagine you are planning a birthday party for your best friend, and the day comes, you surprise them, and you find out that that day indeed was not their birthday. Their birthday was 4 months ago and you missed it because you assumed the truth that their birthday was today. This is a sincerity. You believed with all your heart that that was true, but man, were there some consequences. That truth was what you perceived to be true, but sincerity didn't make it true. Another one, which, if there are children around, please plug their ears, but Santa Claus. Children sincerely believe that Santa Claus is real, and that's because their parents tell them that, but no matter how sincere they are, doesn't change reality. So sincerity isn't enough. Yes, we do value sincerity, and truth can be sincere. It can also be insincere. It can show that you care. When you know a truth and then you act on it, I think that's when sincerity actually has value. Sometimes we discredit truths because of how insincere people are when they tell it to us, but we cannot let people's levels of sincerity be the deciding factor in whether or not we think their claims to be true. A wickedly insincere person can say some of the truest things. They can say facts just like a sincere person, even if they're trying to exploit these facts for personal gain. Whenever we hear a statement, sometimes we discredit the statement outright just because of the person who said it. We should evaluate the statement rather than the person. Yeah, you can make judgments about a person and assume generally whether they're a trustworthy source or not, but every statement that they make doesn't have to be false just because they're generally a liar. So we know the different types of truths. We know that we should care about it, and that sincerity is not the deciding factor in truths. So now that we know that truths exist, the next question is, can I know the truth? Can I find it? Like I said earlier, knowledge is divided into 2 categories. It's either empirical or sensory knowledge, or purely rational or deductive knowledge. So depending on the truth that you're searching for will depend on how you look for it. For instance, I wouldn't go to a dictionary to find truth pertaining to whether or not a spiritual being exists. I also wouldn't go do a scientific experiment to find out the history of a world war. And I wouldn't make logic or philosophy the foundation for my proofs about whether or not a dish tasted good. We need to figure out what we're looking for so that we can look for it in the right ways. Because let's face it, there is a reality that is true whether or not we are aware of it. And there's an absolute truth that will only be accessible if we understand a wide enough perspective of the issue to understand and pull out the truth from the whole. So we can find the truth. How do we do it? How do we find this objective truth outside of the subjective truths that we have? First of all, can we trust our senses? Can we trust that we can perceive things that can lead us to the truth? A subjective mind can know an objective truth. These aren't mutually exclusive ideas. The analogy that's often given for this is being in a cave. Imagine you're in this pitch black, dark cave, and the only tool that you have is a flashlight. So without the flashlight, you can't see anything. The question is, are you prevented from seeing the actual real walls of the cave because you have to use a flashlight? No. Does the flashlight create the walls around you? No. The real, actual reality, the nature of the cave, doesn't stay hidden just because you have to use a tool to be able to see it. And this is the same way for our human mind. You have to use your mind to understand the world around you. But that doesn't mean that you're incapable of understanding what's around you. That doesn't mean that your mind is creating all of the things that you're seeing just because you're seeing it. Your mind is just a tool that you're able to use to take in the objective truths around you. And our minds are capable of so much. We can recognize internal truth, so like my experience, and that's subjectivity. And then we can recognize the external truth, which is our experiences. And so we recognize that this external truth is objectively reality. So we can know truth. We should know truth. Truth is something that we should be searching for and that we can find, that our minds are capable of knowing. This is all great information. And I wish that we used it more. But if we look at history in general, we don't necessarily evaluate truths for ourselves. At some point in time, we start to take other people's words as truth. People tell us statements and then they say, these have already been evaluated, and so you can trust them as true. And we take them as true because we don't want to have to evaluate everything for ourselves. And honestly, I'm really grateful that we don't have to evaluate everything for ourselves. This would take forever. And we get to know the results of really complex, difficult evaluations just because we are able to share with one another what we find. And this communication of knowledge, this sharing of information, really what we call education, this is learning. This is what we've been doing for the existence of humanity. We have passed down, and now not only people, but communities, societies at large accumulate these vast collections of truths. And so we've had truths that have been tested over and over and over again, and then we pass them down and we pass them down and we pass them down, and we're able to just assume them because they've been tried and true. And we trust that the people who are passing them down have our best interests at heart. And so this is where we get into the realm of paradigms. This is a whole new subject for me. I have not ever looked into this, but since I had no idea what this stuff was, I took a bunch of notes on it. To my best ability, I will try to explain what paradigms are. So, a collection of truths that's made into a pattern or a set that form mutually exclusive choices, a framework containing all the commonly accepted views about a subject is a paradigm. So, it's this model, it's this pattern, a collection of truths in a certain area. An axiom is a statement or preposition which is regarded as being established, accepted, or self-evidently true. So these are also called truisms, or accepted truths, or general truths. The word axiom comes from the Greek word axioma, meaning that which is thought worthy or fit, or that which commends itself as evident. So the things that we're like, this is an obvious truth. These are things that are the foundations for paradigms. So different paradigms exist built on different axioms or different truths that we think are self-evident. One example of a paradigm is the paradigm of truth. So everything that I've been talking about and a lot more, all of this is in the paradigm of truth. And this is all of our collections of thoughts and truths regarding the realm of truth. And the axioms of truth are that we exist, that the universe is honest, and that truth connects us. So those three things are things that we assume whenever we're going to talk about truths, because if any of those things aren't true, then the whole paradigm of truth falls apart. And there's always people who will deny certain axioms in certain paradigms. Like if you deny the axiom that the universe is honest in the paradigm of truth, then yeah, that's an option. And every paradigm has an emergency exit. But the trade-off in this case is that you're left with no truth. I mean, the choice is yours, but personally, I would rather get things done. I would rather learn things. I would rather promote justice and have a happy life. So the paradigm of truth, it's really useful. And since it's useful, that is what matters, because it's going to help us make use of this short, finite time that we have here on this planet. So the truth helps us live our lives, and the paradigm of truth is just one of many paradigms. Here are some examples of paradigms and their axioms. In math, the concept of numbers is an absolute. It's an axiom. There's no point in arguing over the existence of numbers when you're trying to count. In science, the concept of evidence is an axiom. There's no point in arguing over the value of evidence when you're trying to establish a new theory. In language, letters, words, and grammar are primitives. They're absolutes. Those are axioms. These are not open for evaluation if you're going to use language. In economics, the concept of value is an axiom. It begins with money and the fact that we see that there's value in money. In cooking, the concept of taste is an absolute. If you are cooking, you can't say that there's no existence of taste and then say you're going to make a delicious meal or a better meal. You have to assume all of those axioms in order for those paradigms to function. And what is important about these is that axioms are defined and they're not sustained by logic or proof within the paradigm. So they're upheld by utility, by conviction, but the absolutes, the axioms, are not proved within the paradigm. So this is relevant because I've seen in my study that some philosophers claim that certain fundamental truths or axioms are not based on evidence because they're necessarily assumed in order to have a working paradigm. And that is true within the paradigm. In the paradigm, you do assume that those axioms are true. You don't try to prove them, they just are. But that doesn't mean that you can't prove them or provide evidence for them from other paradigms. It can be sustained by the logic or proof from another or from multiple other paradigms. Here's what I mean by this. I can't prove to you the concept of taste within the paradigm of cooking because you have to assume that. But I can build evidence for believing this truth from the paradigm of science and collective human experience. The science behind taste makes me able to be reassured that my assumptions within the cooking paradigm are good and that my life isn't wasted by believing I can make some dishes taste better than others, or that taste of food even matters. So shout out to you cooks out there who are making dishes better every day. Keep it up. Your paradigm matters. I mention this because in religion, the concept of God is an axiom. It's an absolute assumed fact, but whenever you look for evidence for the existence of God, you look to other paradigms. And I'm not saying that every axiom in every paradigm can be proven by another paradigm, but you can collect evidences from other paradigms to see why this assumption was made in the first place. I don't know that any of our axioms and any of our paradigms are questionable. They all exist because it was assumed, and rightly so, all of the human existence has assumed it over time. So that was kind of the side quest on paradigms and axioms. So whenever you're finding a truth, you need to find out what paradigm it's in so you can figure out how you're going to support that truth with evidences that are relevant to that truth. I'm not going to try to prove an axiom of economics, like the value of money, in economics. I can prove other things in economics using economics because that is just the foundation, but I can't prove the foundation using something that's built on that foundation. I'd be talking in circles. And so whenever you figure out what you're trying to find, that'll help you better be able to find it. Now for, I guess, the capstone of this idea of truth. How do we find it? What is the step-by-step process? Whenever we seek truth, we have to evaluate our intentions. Are you genuinely interested in what's true? Or is defending yourself and proving yourself right more important? If you're interested in discovering the truth, you have to be willing to put aside your preconceived notions, your opinions, your biases, and this open mind is going to allow you to explore different viewpoints so that you can come closer to the objective or the absolute truth. So step 1, self-reflect on your beliefs and your assumptions. Step 2 is to think critically about the truth. You want to gather your information from multiple sources. Don't just go to one source. And I think that this is a bad habit that a lot of us build from having, at least in the American education system, I was public schooled, and this was kind of a bad habit that I developed. When you're just looking to get a good grade and you're just looking to get the right answer and move on, then you Google something quick. Actually, I learned this the other day. Most people, whenever you Google something, you think that the top ad is going to be not as trustworthy because it's probably promoted or paid advertising, and so most people click the second link instead of the first link, which I thought was interesting because that's not always true. Sometimes the second link is an ad, or the third or fourth, and sometimes the first link is not an ad, or sometimes the first link is an ad, but it still has the true best information that is honest. So, yeah. But anyways, I built this habit of searching for the answer. The first one I see, I write it down and then I move on. And so I don't critically evaluate all information like I should. But we should gather info from multiple sources. And then, after we have gathered the info, we should evaluate the credibility of those sources. There's going to be a difference between your 8-year-old brother's speculations and a studied scholar in the field. There are lots of different ways to evaluate credibility of sources. We'll probably get into that one day eventually, but for now, just know that you need to evaluate the credibility of the sources that you're drawing information from. Step 3 is to draw your conclusion based on the evidence, and always be open to more cumulative and representative collections of sources of evidence. Finding the truth is a lifelong journey, and depending on what truth you're looking for will depend on how hard you should look for it. If it's something that doesn't ultimately matter, like, I don't have to know if aliens are real. That's a really cool thing to look at, but I'm not going to spend my whole life digging into that to find that truth. But there are bigger questions that are important, things that impact us in the here and now and in the future. And those truths are the ones that we should spend time every day searching for. And when we think we finally found the truth, we should reevaluate every once in a while and make sure that what we know is the truth, and that with the cumulative of all the evidence in front of us, we can be certain that it is true. If we're searching daily, then likely daily we're going to find mistakes or things that weren't true, that we thought were true, that we need to change. This is hard, but it's okay. It's making us better people. Absolute truth, it transcends all subjective experiences and perspectives, and so there are going to be times where maybe your subjectivity clashes with an objective or absolute truth. That's when we have to be humble and really want the best for ourselves. So the 3 steps of finding truth is reflect on your beliefs and assumptions, think critically, and under think critically, you want to gather the info and evaluate the credibility of the info. And then step 3, draw your conclusion based on the evidence. I think I should add a 4th step, which is be willing to change your mind when you're presented with new evidence. So this will allow you to update your understanding of a topic. It'll allow you to make better decisions. And this is what we call intellectual humility. If you want to make a commitment to truth seeking rather than just defending your preconceived beliefs, then have intellectual humility. Be willing to say, whenever I find something that isn't in line with what I thought, I'm willing to go where the evidence leads me. Basically, Aristotle put it like this: to say of what is that it is not, or of what is not that it is false. While to say of what is that it is, or what is not that it is not, is true. And maybe I should have just started there and ended there, because Aristotle was on point. Objective or absolute truth, they're outside of our influence. They either are or they aren't. And those are the kind of truths that matter, the ones that we should be seeking in our everyday lives. Another GOAT, Thomas Aquinas, characterized truth as the correlation of intellect and reality. So in other words, if reality is as your intellect judges it to be, then truth is a quality that is in your judgment and in your intellect. So we want what we judge to be true to match what actually is true. One last side note is that language does change over time. We recognize that definitions change, connotations change, metaphors change, and so whenever we're looking at research or truths of old, we should know that if there is an absolute truth that was discovered in the past, it is still true today, even if their language doesn't reflect the same way it would be true today. So whenever we are looking at old truths, the change in the language doesn't prevent us from knowing the truth that they knew. We just have to learn how people defined terms in that time and use the words that they used in their context to understand the truth that they were communicating. So if someone says to me, La nieve es blanca, I would understand what they say, despite that the language isn't my own, because I took the time to learn the Spanish and what it means in today's English. So a sentence that once expressed truth in a time of old, it can become a false statement now if you take the words out of their context, if you read them in the way that we would use those words today. But the sentence is still true as its words were originally defined. We just use different words today to communicate those truths. And that will become important whenever you're looking at maybe historical truths or truths that haven't been researched in a long time. So whenever you're looking at really old evidence, you should figure out what the words that they said meant to the audience in that day or to the author in that day. Okay, full recap. Long story short, truth is reality. It's out there and it's our choice to look for it. Until we go out of our personal little bubble and try to find truths, the only truths that we know will be the ones that are subjective to us. Accumulating data, logic, and evidences from multiple sources is going to be the way that we can come to know objective truths. There are some objective truths that on this earth we may never be able to comprehend or know, but there are still many objective truths that we can come to find or that are just given to us as freebies. Our senses and our brains are our best friends when it comes to seeking truth. You can trust your brain, you can trust your senses. Most of the time, your brain, your senses are going to be the tools that you're able to use to help you find truths. So that was long story short. Short story short, if you've ever said that there is no truth or that truth is 100% relative, personal, can't be known, please stop saying that. You've got some self-defeating statements and you're using absolute truths to try to prove that absolute truths don't exist. It may not feel like it, but this was a very surface level discussion of truth. I have over 15 pages of notes on this stuff, and it's really only the highlights of what I've read. So if this interests you, I'm going to try to attach some resources below for further study. I hope that you are able to conclude based on this discussion are just based on reality and the obvious facts around you, that absolute truth is the truth that matters, and it is possible for us to look for it and find it every single day if we wanted to. I've got to be willing to set my emotions, my pride, my assumptions aside, and I've got to go out looking for the truth. It's not just going to fall into my lap. It does sometimes, but that is a rare and blessed occasion. So that is truth, or at least the foundation of where you can start in discovering truth. I am going to continue to do faith episodes building on this. We will talk about purpose and then go on to look at different truths that I've discovered recently or have just been reminded of. Unlike people in A Few Good Men, I hope that you can handle the truth, and I look forward to discovering more truths with you guys. As we wrap up this episode of the Lydia Todd Pod, I want to express my heartfelt gratitude for you spending time with me. This really challenges my belief that I only have 5 consistent listeners. If you have any thoughts, topics, or questions you'd like me to explore further on future episodes, please reach out on one of my socials. I hope that our conversations have brought you inspiration and joy. If you have friends or family who might be interested in our conversations, don't hesitate to share the podcast with them.